this is back in 2014. So the more I read about it, the more I realized that, just living a personal sustainable life is probably not enough, but there is more that can be done, and there are people who are actually pursuing this.
Yeah, so Khushboo, tell us about yourself, like introduce yourself and your background and what you're currently doing.
Hi, my name is Khushboo. I am currently based in Pune, born and raised from Bombay. I currently run a startup from the name of Go Do Good. We are into uplifting the value of materials, especially waste materials, or like what we call as agro waste. And we specifically focus on packaging as our main vertical. So our startup has been around for 2.5 years. And the research, of course, has been going on for I don't know how many years, probably like 7 years, 5 years, or something like that. But all of this journey started almost, I think, in 2014 or 15 after I graduated from college. So I've kept shifting verticals. So I come from a background of fashion, then I moved towards graphic and packaging, where I focus a lot more on communication and form development. And from there, I did my master's in material development, because I wanted to bridge the gap between innovation and at the same time, bring like this design aesthetic, or like, this design thinking that, I've learned and implemented in my former years, but in a very innovation and a very like eco-friendly and sustainable space. So that's how the journey has been. Of course, there are a lot more pointers in the middle, and there have been a lot of like ups and downs in terms of struggles with dealing with science, or like, understanding what circular economy is, especially in the Indian context. Because I think circular economy, when you learn from the West, is very different. But when you want to apply it like in India, you have to like, tweak your fundamentals around. You have to understand what those values mean, but in the Indian way. So yes, that was just like a constant learning all through these years. And like that helps us build the principles that we follow at the studio.
Awesome. So, Khushbu, can you tell us about what was the time or like point when you realize that okay, you want to go into sustainability as a field? Like what sort of like triggered you to start this journey?
To be honest, like, I'm actually grateful for it, because at home we've always lived that kind of a life. Like, I've always seen my grandmom, like my nanny or my mom, sort of save the smallest wrapper. Like, I still remember my nanny has this box where all the ribbons from all the gifts would go in one box, bags would have a certain space. There was nothing that was thrown out of the house, or like very rarely it would be thrown. So this thing was something that I've grown up seeing, but it never hit me that you can also build a career in sustainability. I always thought that we all do our own bit, we all individually take care of our needs like this, and then we make sure that okay, the planet is okay. But once you grow up, once you step out, you realize the amount of waste people create, or the amount of waste we unknowingly create, and the amount of impact it makes. So I specifically remember this one trek that I gone for in Ladakh, the charter trek. And that one trek is something where you by the river through and through. So for 7 days, you are camping next to the river, and there is no network, of course. There are very limited people. Like, you have only a group of 7 to 8 people in one go. It's not like one of those big treks where like you have a group of 20 or 40 people. Very limited sort of company that you have, and everything that you need, it is on you and in that moment. So like, whether you need to clean your utensils, whether you need to like freshen up, whether you have to take a shower, clothes, whatever it is, you've planned and you've carried it with you. And that was the first time when I realized that the soap that we use, or like the detergent that people use, went directly inside the river. And back at home, when we live in a city, everything goes down the drain. So we feel like someone is taking care of it. We have no idea who that someone is, but we believe there is someone out there who's, looking into this and sort of seeing, okay, like, this is going down the drain, but it'll get disinfected, or, it'll get cleared somewhere or the other. But that's when I realized, I was like, this is going in the water directly. This, of course, doesn't feel natural. Is it okay? So for me, the only question that came that time was like, is it okay for my toothpaste powder to go down this water river? Because it's pristine, clean, frozen, partly like flowing water that's there through and through. So I was like, is this okay? Or can this be left over here? And that kept coming every time I saw like, thought of like some soap or like the toothpaste powder and stuff. So I came back from the trek with this question. Then I started reading more and more about this. And this is back in 2014. So the more I read about it, the more I realized that, just living a personal sustainable life is probably not enough. But there is more that can be done, and there are people who are actually pursuing this as a career. And you can still make a living out of it. You can still earn your bread and butter. You can still create good impact, both at your professional and your personal life. So that's when I realized that I was like, okay, I was like, I've not been told about this. It felt like a eureka moment, but I was like, okay, I'm a little too late because I was done with graduation and anyway switched from studying fashion to doing a graphic job. So I was like, okay, one more switch into a field where I have no knowledge about feels a little too risky to get into. That's when like the quest to know more about this started, and then slowly over time I started doing more and more courses, short courses, long time courses on biomimicry, on circular economy from Ellen MacArthur, from this cradle to cradle. Like there were so many books and all that were available already by then that it gave me an idea as to what all professional options can one have if they want to imply sustainability into their lifestyle. So I was like, okay, if I want to make my living out of this, I was like, these are the different verticals which are there. So the initial few years was just studying about that. Through graphic, because I was into graphic designing, through communication and like through game development or like through packaging, there was a lot that I could do. So then a lot of my projects started going to that direction, where I would a lot of the projects that I'll be working on would be towards like, maybe like a Manrega scheme, or like, bringing like the awareness about solar panels, or like, wastewater in general and stuff like that. But somewhere it still felt like, we are talking a lot about the problems, but we don't have too many solutions yet. So I can tell someone, no, don't do this. But then the other person's always going to ask, but okay, I won't, but then what else do I use? Or like, what else do I do? And then that question led to the fact that, okay, I need to pick up chemistry, I need to understand how to innovate, and how can the one actually build things or like, alternatives for these things. So yeah, it's been a long, twisted journey.
And it's like something I think everyone can relate, because we all have had these moments, but most of us are not kind of able to take action. But it's amazing that the way you have come through. So did you like study properly in chemistry, or was it more like experimentation? Can you tell us a bit about that part?
So, yeah, I mean, in plain sense, like, no, I've not studied chemistry. It's just that when I was growing up, it just did not interest me as a subject. So, design and craft is something I've always loved. So, it was a no-brainer that I don't want to go in the science stream. But later on, because I wanted to get into the sustainable side of like making materials, I needed chemistry. Like, I needed to understand chemistry. I needed to understand what the basics or the core of like any material works. And by then it was again too late, because like I was like done with most part of my studies, and then going back, especially in the Indian system, is not possible. So when you don't come from a science background, there are a lot of restrictions as to how one can play with it, or like how one can sort of go into learning about this thing. So that's when I realized that maybe there are like alternative ways to learn this thing. So I started following a lot of people who have this way of teaching alternate chemistry, where you are still learning chemistry, but you learn chemistry from your everyday life. So your everyday aspects. So there are also books written about this, where like you understand chemistry in your day-to-day habits. So like from your morning to night routine, where is chemistry applied, it gives like a very realistic way of looking at it. And those books, or like those kind of courses sort of helped me get my basic knowledge about chemistry. And then finally, when I did my master's in material development, I had like a proper strong base, because our professor from my college focused a lot on practical chemistry. So it wasn't like a very bookish way of looking at it, but it was all like based on practical experiments. And that is usually like the best way, as for me at least, to like learn, or like to understand something where you're not aware about the course. So that's been my journey, but I'm actually happy it went that way, because for me, then I wasn't restricted to like, what most people in India, like the way they would be taught about chemistry. So like for me, breaking rules never came through like the book, but they came from the fact that, okay, I was exposed to green chemistry, which is usually not covered in most courses. But that was like my foundation. So when green chemistry became my foundation, I realized the importance of using clean chemicals or when I'm making my materials. I realized the value that, one needs to follow in terms of disposing any sort of even organic chemicals that are used, or like the impact that even natural chemicals can have if not disposed the right way. So because my foundation only started from like these kind of values, the overall learning that I had in terms of ingredients that can be used, in terms of different components that can be used, was very different from the regular section of what is usually taught in terms of what should be used or what should not be used. So overall, like it was a good thing.
Yeah, like makes a lot of sense. Like when you start with values, the education becomes, the part of it, and your habits eventually become part of it, right? And you get a little bit more purposeful in what that's been on working. So, like, can you tell us how that translates into what Go Do Good does today, right? Like, what do you offer in general to the market or to the consumers that you are working with?
So that while that started as a thought as to how once this educates themselves about like the responsibility of using clean and green chemistry or like science in general, what we realized that one of the we wouldn't say loopholes, but one of the most untapped places was innovation at a material level. So even today, when you speak to someone, when you think about material innovation, for most people, it's about okay, oh no, that is like a high-tech lab sort of a space, or like you need to be like a very funded company, or like you need to come from a certain background to be able to do that. And we wanted to break that stereotype. We wanted to make like the development of materials or like the access to sustainability much more free flowing, or like much more like there needs to be more freedom in this space, so that more and more people can actually work on this. So like tomorrow, if someone wants to make leather, they should not hesitate before trying, thinking ki, oh what will be the law or what will be the norm about it, or can one actually do it or not, because it is doable. So that was our starting point, and we realized that packaging as a segment is something which has been very untapped, and for obvious reasons, right? Like packaging is usually done in large volumes. You have major industry players, mostly like run by generations of um, generation-led businesses that usually run these kind of big companies, and it's done at a scale where most people feel that innovating in this sector becomes very difficult. But at the same time, we realize that that's the biggest need of the hour, because everyone has started almost like when we started, like this thought has come, I can say now like 5 years ago. That time you had like a good section of eco-friendly materials available in the market. So there were like, you get these eco-friendly cleaners and like, food products and sustainable products were there. Not as readily available as they are today, but like they were still available. But the packaging is something that always lagged. So if something has to be bubble wrap, it still is bubble wrap. There was no innovation that happened over there, for example. Or so suppose if you need a plastic lining or coating in something you're eating, there was no one working on those things. So we realized that that gap needs to be filled in, because until and unless we don't address the whole thing of having sustainable. Sorry, just give me 1 second to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So until and unless that gap is not being addressed, between of having eco-friendly products, but at the same time eco-friendly materials or like packaging or like the protection layer, which also supports it. So till the time it's not going hand in hand, it gets very difficult to create that impact that even a sustainable company is trying to do, and it being sector agnostic. So there is no specific sector that does not need packaging. Every single thing that we use comes in a package. Everything needs that layer of protection. So that's how we realize that okay, this is a good place to create actual good proper impact. Make sure that people understand that this is a very accessible field and more people should get into it. So that was a direct correlation with learning whatever I had in from the basics of chemistry to applying it in the packaging field specifically to make sure that we sort of bridge and we fill that gap between the final product and the protection layer around it.
Like I think we have gotten an idea of your transition into sustainability and the way what do Go Do Good does. But can you tell us about like the first sort of step? Like how did that journey started? Like what was the first like sort of project or the material that you worked on? How did the research kicked off?
So plastic was always, of course, one of our main focuses where we wanted to eradicate plastic, but we realized that plastic has so many layers and it has so many different industries that it works with. So right from LDP to coatings to lamination to shrink wrap to HDP, like the list goes on. So we realized that there are two categories that we divided our research in. One is just a simple protection layer, which does not require any technical requirement per se for the material. So to give you an example, the polypropylene bags that are used to protect a garment when they are being shipped, other than it being dust proof or no dirt coming on your t-shirt, there is no other role that that layer plays versus a polypropylene bag that is used for food, which is used to store the food for almost 3 months, for example. So that is an added technical layer to the purpose of that material that is innovated. So that is a long-term challenge, and that requires more research, more time, more R&D back and forth in terms of the different applications and and at what extent can it be done. So we realized that starting from the simpler one, where at least when plastic is used a lot more frivolously because consumerism has become in a way where we are expected a certain amount of protection or like tamper proof or seal proof sort of a box that we expect at our end. We realize that this is an easy market to target. So funnily, actually, the first thing that we made, we've still not launched, and hopefully we will launch it this year. But we made these films back in 2019 or 2020 out of seaweed. So we use seaweed as a raw material because when we were looking at all of these, so to go a little back from there, our basic research method to do any of this is you look at the process, you look at the end use, and you look at the raw material that's used. And then you see how can you create like a connection line between all three of them. So raw material, usually most of them are land-based. So land-based meaning like sugarcane, corn, potato starch, and a whole bunch of other, these different crops or crop-based which are used. But the more and more of land use that is done for your packaging materials, that means the lesser amount of land use you get for food, which is a more important use, or which is a more important requirement per se. So we want to switch from that. So our first thing was like, okay, you get away from these land-based crops, materials or something and see what else is available. We stumbled upon seaweed. Again, that was something I'd also learned in college and I'd done a couple of experiments over there as well. So there was a certain amount of confidence in terms of building the prototype and the pilot stage of it. So that was our first material where we were able to make sheets from seaweed, which could actually hold water and oil for as long as up to 2 to 3 days, which in our opinion was like a good start because for example these milk bags that we get, right, these LDP milk bags, the shelf life of it is not more than 2 days, and as a country we end up, I think the stats that we checked last was around 10 billion bags per day or something like that are used every day, which is like a really huge number. And imagine if that can be replaced, just that one application can be replaced by like a seaweed pouches. The kind of impact we can create is at a very good and large scale. So that was the first material that we made. And the plus point about that, the material we made from seaweed was that you did not, you could either compost it at home or you could literally boil it in hot water, use it as a fertilizer for your plants. It's as simple and it's as straightforward because there was nothing else but only seaweed. like no synthetic polymers, no PLA, no PBATs, none of like, those synthetic, almost synthetic biopolymers, which, usually don't degrade in nature naturally. So we had made sure like, none of those uh, are added in our final material. But the challenge over there is scaling up because a product like this, in terms of the price, in terms of production capacity, you can only reach when there's a certain amount of setup. So we've been in that phase for now, like almost 2 years, to make sure that we get to that stage and level where we can hit those production numbers and we can create that impact. So we're hoping this year we get to launch it. But that was the first product we worked on. But like it's with materials, it's an ongoing thing. So like we keep innovating a lot with different types of materials. Some of them get used then and there. Some of them have to be paused for a while and then we pick it up on it again. Right after that, we actually worked on the coating, which now we've been running successfully for the last. We've been doing sales for it for the last 2 years now. So that was something that was done almost 2.5 years ago. Where like the first layer of coating that we had on the paper, that could also withstand water for almost 24 hours that time. Now it has increased to over like 48 hours, and if it's just moisture protection, then over over 90 days, actually not 30 days. So that was our second material. Again, the reason why we worked on the coating was because everything that we drink coffee in, or we eat a snack in, or we order mithai from, cake from, everything that we feel is paper and is probably eco-friendly, it all has a layer of PE coating or PP coating, what they call it. So it's either polypropylene or polyethylene, which does not allow your final product to be either recycled or composted or biodegraded. So the only space that it has is the landfill. And as a usual end consumer, I wouldn't expect someone to know that. Like if someone gives like, my mom a paper cup, she's going to be very happy. She's going to be like, wow, you switch from plastic to, like a paper cup. But we don't realize that, that's not the case. So that's when I realized that, okay, this area creates a lot of issues in the system that we live in. And this needs like a quick fix, or like, this needs like a better alternative, because we can't change consumer behavior patterns, or, we can't change consumption patterns. Like that's a very long battle. But we can make sure that if someone is consuming something, then at least we can create like a better, or like, a less harmful impact on the environment. So that's how the coating came into play. Again, like a basic philosophy is like no synthetic chemicals, no petrochemicals, no paraffin, like nothing that cannot go back to nature in its natural form. As simple as that. So none of those things then end up being a part of a materials. So that was the second material. But back in the day, honestly, like almost 2.5 years before from now, we experimented a lot with materials. Like that time I remember making paper from water hyacinth. We work with bamboo to make like, your food and your fruits, basically your fruits and vegetable baskets and stuff. But we parked most of them as like ongoing R&D, and we commercialized only the coating at that point, because that had like the most amount of impact and value for us to grow as a business as well. But I mean, it's a long list. If I end up talking about like even in the materials we worked in the first 6 months, we'll spend like another 10 minutes just discussing those things.
But like that's a more scientific journey in general case as well, right? Taking up material by material and doing it right, with trying out different layers and things like that. So I have two questions. First one being, there has been a lot of talk in the market about bio-based plastic, right? And compostable plastics as well. So some of these are like can be only biodegraded under certain temperatures and pressures, which is like in special facilities. They don't biodegrade on landfills. So can you like talk us more about your material? Like what's the end cycle of that materials in general case? Like we spoke about cradle to cradle cycle being there. So does that translate into the philosophy that your product line has?
Yes, it actually translates to all the products that we have. So it's a very simple rule. Like any material that you make, even if it is like, naturally derived, we need to make sure that we only process it either mechanically or chemically in a way where it can naturally go back to nature. Because most chemical reactions are irreversible. So if you irreverse even a natural material to a point where it can't reverse back to its degraded form, that means we've passed that stage for it to be natural anymore. Like plastic also, it comes from fossils. Fossils is still natural. It's just that it's a non-renewable material resource. But if you technically look into it, then it is still natural, right? But it's because of the fact that it's been really processed to that extent where it can't go back is what makes it harmful. So for us, the plain and simple rule that we have is that any and every product we make should be able to be home composted in very simple terms. Because where we went wrong with plastic was the fact that there were no recycling centers. So especially like in a developing nation like ours, to have like these large infrastructures to look into these things are required at a larger scale, and it needs to be decentralized. So like every area to have a recycling plant or a industrial compostable plant will be a long-term plan for the government or like for private companies in general. So if we can keep that system independent, then we know we're closing the whole loop without depending on like another industry. So through this, in a way, we're also hoping that we are sort of spreading the word for people to learn more about home composting, to to nourish the soil, to create their own fertilizer, not throw the food waste. That is one like a underlying message that we try to give away. But say suppose if someone doesn't end up home composting, or like someone doesn't know the system about home composting is, even if it's just thrown like on like in soil or something, it will still biodegrade. That is the second step. So if home composting is not done, it will still biodegrade by itself naturally. It will of course take longer because it's not got the same conditions. So like for example, if it will biodegrade, it will be home composted in like 6 to 8 weeks. Then biodegrading it will almost take 12 to 16 weeks most likely. And even if that's not the case, it can still go back to a recycling center. So say suppose if all of this paper, if we start using that, this at a very large volume, if you collect it and if you send it to like a paper recycling plant, it will still get recycled. So there are no loopholes that we've tried to leave for any of the three stages. So that is there for the coating. When it comes to seaweed, recycling is not possible because we don't have that kind of a setup for bioplastics at the moment. So in that case, it's either biodegrading it or home composting it. And for coir, again, it's the same. Like, there is no recycling center, but it's more you biodegrade it or you can use it as mulch at your end. So it varies from material to material, but our basic policy is that we don't rely on industrial composting units in general, or we don't create things which cannot be degraded in like not a human life frame, but like a yearly life frame. So like it's short, and you can actually see it in front of you that okay, this is done, disappeared back to soil, and we can use like another layer of it.
Sort of like started building these materials, and how was your like sort of go-to market experience? Like when you started approaching clients for like take up these materials for packaging, what did you face, and how did you kind of scale that front?
For most people, for the longest time, it was a little hard to believe that something like this existed or like something like this was done in-house. So one of the few questions that used to be asked very often is, so where is the technology from? Or, where are you outsourcing this from? Like which country is this coming from? So it's very hard for me to explain it to people that it's locally made, locally sourced, raw materials are from India, manufacturing happens in India, innovation has happened in India. And then they would be like, no, there has to be something. So then we had a very simple policy. You take our samples, you test it at your end, test it with your product, test the end life cycle of it, and then you get back to us. Like we can show you 5 certificates. But then if you can do like a live testing at your end, then there is no better reality versus seeing it by your own eyes. So that was like a very simple policy we've always had. In terms of client learnings, I think most people are very open to it. we have become much more price competitive from when we started. So like a year and a half ago, like our prices were still slightly on the higher side, which was the biggest barrier for like a lot of people who were doing large volumes, because our manufacturing capacity size was low and our prices were high. So, most startups or most like, medium scale industries could not afford us very easily until unless, they had like a very strong connect with nature. So that used to become like a biggest barrier, which over time we have, overcome through like, better and more efficient systems, better machinery, better technology. So now we're actually price compare like exactly at par in terms of pricing with like the plastic packaging you get in the market. So people are more open to trying this. So even if someone doesn't have like that extra knack for the environment, they're still like, okay, if it's the same pricing, then might as well do something which is not harming the environment, sort of a thing. But just like a biggest learning from clients has been that until and unless they don't see it, or they don't sort of get to explore or like test the material by themselves, it's hard for them to be convinced with the fact that actually it's not kuch nahi hai. So yeah, that was like a biggest turning or like learning from the whole process.
So how did you communicate that to them, that this is what happens to the materials, like what's your uh, you know go to differentiation to them, because there are multiple players in the market in sustainability, right? And there's a lot of greenwashing going on as well in terms of what's being put out there. So how did you make sure that the communication is right? And do you run any experiments to show clients that this is how we do, or the materials end up in the end journey?
So we do these experiments all the time. So I mean, that is one thing which has actually helped the end consumer also, or the end client also, gain more trust towards what we do. And there's overall transparency. So we've always been transparent to all of our clients. If we are at a pilot stage and if we are experimenting and they are open about that, they like the end client knows about it. So overall transparency in terms of the manufacturing and the creation processes has helped gain more trust, because it's not like it was a borrowed technology which we was just like mass producing over here. This is something we had built in-house. So catering to personalized solutions that they wanted. So say suppose they wanted in a different format, or they wanted like in a higher concentration or a lower concentration based on the product. There was a certain amount of customization that we could offer, with being transparent about like that it could not work or it could work, or the fact that our material worked with a few of their end products and sometimes it would not work. So being open to being vulnerable in front of a client has helped them believe that okay, it's a true honest company, because most people are not okay to show their failures to their clients. And we were like, look, this happens, like these are natural materials we're working with, we do have these glitches, but we also know ways to come over them. So that trust in general over time has helped clients believe in us. And then of course, the word of mouth through like the different clients in general. And when it comes to composting or recycling, more than anything else, like the basic lab test. So say, for example, for packaging, like your metal test or your migration, like your migration test or your lead test. So more than like with, of course, certifications, yes, but with that, your basic testing of the coating or the paper itself has helped build that. It's reinforced that okay, like what these guys are talking is backed with these kind of documentations or even these kind of processes, and for us to just be open for them to test it out. So when we share videos or when we share processes of how you can actually home compost, or how you can send it back to recycling. So we have made paper from our own uh, coated left out scraps. So when we have those papers made, when we show those videos and we show those paper sheets to people, they know that okay, what these guys are saying is it's not just words, but like it's tried and tested over time. And like also our Instagram page is more about all about the trials we keep doing. So let's say suppose today if we're trying out a coating with like different types of sauces and dips, it will be out there in like the post in terms of the story, in terms of like communicating with our end client. So that sort of transparency is something which most other brands don't have currently when they're talking about their products. So yeah, that has also helped us.
Yeah. So Khushboo, you mentioned about like sometimes you require like customization based on client requirement, right? And usually like for general people like us, the perception is like the manufacturing setup of these things are like really costly or like hard to kind of figure it out. You can't do it for small samples and stuff like that. So how are you like sort of tackling that, the manufacturing front of it, if you can share some details?
So we have broken the manufacturing thing into again two segments. One is our ongoing products, which we as a company have innovated on, and which we feel like is where what the market needs. Like for example, your stand-up pouches, your mithai boxes, your cake boxes, or even your cake board. Like the cake board is something that the only option you have is a plastic or a foil coated cake board. There's nobody else working in this eco-friendly, sustainable space. We're the only people making those things. So those are mandates that we give them, which is our general manufacturing sort of assembly line, which we don't touch. But what we realized, and this came again with a lot of passion because we wanted to make sure that the manufacturing barriers in general are broken and manufacturing can be more playful, more experimental, more like you keep upgrading with time. So there's a smaller segment that we've kept for these kind of orders or for these kind of experiments, so that we make sure that when we have these kind of orders, be it small scale, be it large scale, we can still take care of it without it affecting the usual assembly line of orders that keep going on. So generally it's a problem because there'll be like one large machine which will be taking care of everything. So we've broken them down into like different steps. So suppose if coating is one unit, then it moves to another unit for the next process, for it to become like a stand-up pouch, for example. So because everything is broken into parts where one is connected to the other, we have sort of ways to tweak around a few things as and when needed. So it's not the traditional way of how manufacturing systems run, but we feel I can't remember the book, but there was this one book I was reading about how industrialization started in general, or how factories were built almost 200 years ago, and there was a lot more freedom and there was a lot more playfulness back in the day, like before industrial revolution was hit, and we coined that term, and before large scale factories happened, the experimentation is what allowed it to get to that stage. So taking our learnings from there, we want to make sure we're there in that space of setting up systems to make it more efficient, but at the same time not setting it so stringent that there is no room to change things around. Because again, like I said earlier, packaging in itself is a field where every single sector is going to have a different requirement for it. So like an e-commerce envelope, and the concentration of coating for that is different from like a food box. And if we are not okay to budge between the two, then we will lose out on one sector. So in a way, like it's also for our own benefit that we make sure that we keep sort of having like these different versatile ways of working around it.
And like how big is the team looking after all this? Like how many people you are working with?
We are roughly between 10 to 15 people. We're not a very big team. We are still growing, and we're still looking for the right people to join us all the time. But it's a slow growth. Like even when with the entire team, like be it skilled, uh, specifics, unskilled, everyone comes with a certain passion to do good work, and that is what drives the team to be together. So to find that thing with people, to make sure that there is this good culture that stays within the company, is something we're trying to grow slowly. But yeah, like we're fairly a small team still.
Because just one more thing, like usually, uh, even us and like a lot of other companies, we usually face this problem in climate and sustainability space, right? Like it's hard to find team members and people to work with because there is entire other industry which pays very well, and like people often prefer that. So I just wanted to understand like how has that been, like finding the team, and like did the people come to you, and how did you like kind of
More than I think For us, more than the salaries or the payments, it's been more about the kind of thought process they come over here with. Because when we're talking about sustainability, and I'm sure you guys relate to this, or when you're talking about innovation in general, there's a certain amount of thought process you need where you break the monotony, right? Or you have this thing about disrupting what is going in the market, and that is usually embedded. It's either there in the person or it's not there. So, to find people who are, in this space of having that particular field's knowledge, and also have coming from this belief that, only when you disrupt the market, or, only when you change or innovate on something, can you, bring in something new, is something we don't find very often in people. So to find that, or to strike that in people, or to evoke it in people that, one can do this, or, you can have this sort of thought process, is the most challenging part. So whenever we find someone with that kind of a behavior, or personality, we make sure that we don't let them go, and just like, okay, now you got to stay here with us.
The working with team and finding the right people is an exciting journey, I would say. And once you let it click with it, I don't see, there is way going back. Like this, join with the purpose, and there is a lot of skill and talent that goes into it. So, and especially
It's like the perfect combination, but it's
yeah.
a rare combination. So we're always hunting.
Correct. So, Khushboo, what is that like you are aiming for in, let's say, next 5 years or 10 years? Like, where do you want to get your team to? Where do you want to get your mission to, right?
So we want to make sure always that the the core values of the company, which is of course we're a for-profit company. So with profits, the people who are working with us and the planet in general, the ecosystem is taken care of. So we want to make sure that that never changes, be it in 5 years or 10 years, or even in 20 years for that matter. So tomorrow also, when we work at scale, when we create that kind of impact, that is one thing we always want to make sure that that is never budged, or we never move away from the main focus. But when it comes to numbers and products, we right now have 4 products in the sustainable packaging space. We want to make sure that, and we have 2 more products in the pipeline, which is the seaweed film that I was talking earlier, and this home compostable foam that we're also working on right now. So we want to make sure we don't stop innovating in what we're doing. Like packaging as a field has a lot more scope, with shrink wrap and with blister packing, and the kind of things that people have come up with, and the impact it has on the environment. We want to make sure that there are enough things that people can pick from it and sort of use into their own vertical. But at the same time, the use of natural materials in general is limited in some format. So while we use, all of our raw materials are regenerative, and they're regenerative in a human lifespan, not longer or shorter or anything like that. So we want to make sure that there is a certain amount of cap that we're looking at. So once we are done with that, then there are other materials that we start focusing on, if that makes sense. So then for example, the coating is something that, as long as we have taken care of, say, suppose, the paper cups, the paper trays, and the boxes, like the mithai boxes. These are a few products that we've realized that people use the most, or they create the most amount of negative impact on the environment. So once we are fulfilled with that, and we've gone pan India, we're okay to take a pause over there and sort of start moving to other materials. So that is in terms of the ethos, or the ethical side for us to look at the growth of materials. When we are looking at more of from a production point of view, or the way our team works, is it's very simple. We're right now, while we do work globally, or we work pan India, we're not available pan India. So to make sure this kind of sustainable packaging is actually accessible and is cheaper than plastic, is what our aim is. So when we see that paper plate that everyone eats in, that typical foil paper plate, which is I think it varies from 50 to 75 paisa. We want to make sure that we have either with our current materials or with the new materials that we develop, we make sure we can replace that one thing. Because that is something which the whole of India eats it. You go to the smallest village, you go to like an MNC, you go to like the most biggest office of like, in Bombay, in Delhi, Bangalore, wherever. You go down, there's a chai tapri over there. You will get chai in that small cup and you get like your snack in that paper plate. So you want to make sure we can replace that with that same price difference. So that is our like 5-year goal, and then to make sure we stick to it in the long 10 years. I hope that like answers your question, because I don't know if
Yeah,
I'm like,
of course, it helps us put in a perspective the kind of vision that you are carrying in general, right? And so, why is it important to be a for-profit company? I just want to press on that as well.
for us, honestly, it's very important because we work with a lot of farmers. We work with a lot of different stakeholders when it comes to work. So if you're not a for-profit company, we can't always be sure or certain of the fact that we can give them an extra buck or we can incentivize them for the work they do. Like, for example, when we started making the hyacinth paper, which is made from water hyacinth, which usually is not collected because there is no incentive for them. They normally, when you have waste pickers or rag pickers who have to do this job, they're either not paid well, or once they have cleared it, there is no use of the raw material. So that means that they're not going to get anything out of it. So they're not motivated. So unless there's not a product, or there's not a fee, or there's not a price attached to it, you can't make like a you can't what do you say, not just incentivize, but you can't stabilize your raw material sources. So like, to stabilize the supply chain and the raw material sources overall, we need to make sure that it's a for profit company, because then everyone gets an equal and like a proper share of what their earning is, which usually we will always be dependent if it's not for a, I mean, if it's, like, if we're not working for profit, we'll always be dependent on funds, versus having like an independent circulation sort of a system where like the earnings of these different products that we sell becomes like the core of the, the building of the company, or like the people working with it. Like, to give you another example, we work with a lot of areca fiber waste. Again, that is something which is just burnt most times. So max to max, just left for it to be rotten over time, which has like multiple diseases, multiple different things. You can get funding once, twice, thrice, probably 10 times. But if we can tell them that you're actually earning money through your own hard work, and make them have that feeling of, being like, okay, you are getting your farm money, but with that, you're also getting this extra buck because you've done this extra work. I feel like that psychological change is what allows people to drive for like, perfection, or like, drive for better, what do you say? Um, Better work. Like, it just allows people to be more and more efficient and to keep improving themselves. Like, that's what drives us. The fact that we know that, okay, we can take care of everyone who's working with us and make sure like, all of their requirements are taken care of. And that also, like, we're a product based company. So when it comes to products, I actually don't see it happening any other way versus it being for profit. Like, it actually drives me for sure, like, to make sure that, okay, the system that we have set, the way we run the business in a way, is in a way where we can actually make profits out of it, is motivating for us and all of like everyone who works with us as well. So yeah, to sum it up, it's just motivation, as simple as that.
I think that's what will keep this entire industry also sustainable. If we are not like into the economic system, then it's very hard to scale this. Also, like some of our friends, ask like, here, you guys are into environment, and if you go and ask for money, people will feel like कि ये environment के लिए और अच्छा काम करने के लिए, why are you charging? And our answer was like कि companies are charging for destroying it, like they are making profit for like destroying it, like it makes sense to at least give it to the companies who are trying to protect it.
That's very, very true.
So it took us some time to kind of formulate that, but I think it's right. It makes so much sense,
Very well and like very rightly said. Like it's so true.
Yeah. So one doubt I had, like in general, the sustainability thing gets affected when we are like manufacturing or scaling at a very, very large scale. Most of the industries became problematic because they started like going to a very huge scale. So how does that work out in terms of your industry and the company? Let's say like if Go Do Good kind of starts manufacturing um, things at the scale where we can replace plastic, does it kind of add an additional burden or a problem in sort of sourcing the raw materials or like the entire process of manufacturing it?
So that used to actually be our biggest fear, where like if we start growing to that scale, where like the natural materials that we use, or like the manufacturing facility in itself becomes this large, then will we still be sustainable? And that is one thing that we still have that fear, and we keep asking ourselves every time we make something new. But we realize that over time that because we have in a way separated the problems of packaging through different materials and through different verticals, we are not dependent on one raw material. So like for example, your bubble wrap, your sellotape, your lamination, your plastic boxes, everything comes from your plastic pellets, right? So it's a one source of raw material in which you have had 10 products. Now we have these same 10 products, but they come from 10 different raw materials. So that in itself reduces pressure per raw material. To like there is, so I'm not saying that okay, one coating is going to solve all of these 10 problems. No, it's just going to solve that one problem of the lamination, and that's it. So where we needed pellets for like maybe like X billion tons, now you only need like probably 1/10 of that amount. So using different sources of raw material always helps to reduce the pressure, because it divides the pressure in a horizontal way, right? So like we need bubble wrap, maybe we need sellotape, we need stickers. But if everything comes from different ways, then we're not creating that pressure. Number one. Number two, whenever we work with a raw material, we have this basic in-house protocol, where we have a background check of the material. So how we have like background checks for like when we're hiring someone or when you're meeting someone new as a potential client or something, we do that for materials. So we have a background check for the material where we understand the history of it, the impact it makes on the environment. Tomorrow, if there's excess growth of it, or like if the growth is reduced, then what happens? If there's over harvesting, then what happens? Or what is the current capacity of production for it, how much we will need even in like a 10 years span, sort of a thing. So there's like an Excel sort of a formula that we have for each material. So once that is filled, we know that okay, this material is safe and good to work with, and this material isn't, sort of a thing. Or like this material is not okay to work with in this format, but it's a good raw material, so we need to figure our own processing sort of a system. So based on that diagnosis, we know that okay, working with like maybe areca fiber or coconut fiber is a good thing, because it's used in this many things and it's a byproduct of like another industry. So if that industry is anyway going to grow in 10 years and this will be a waste source, you might as well use it, for example. So then through this permutation combination, we understand whether will it be harmful or no, and whether we'll have enough raw material supply or no also. So then it becomes like, okay, like we go ahead with it then, because we don't want to like spend in all the energy, time, effort to know that 2 years later that, oh, we can't, get to use this anymore.
Got it. Got it. No, thanks a lot for kind of explaining the circle. Yeah.
Yeah, we have a lot of weird systems, and we do things in a little different manner, because most of the people on our team, they don't come from the background where they would be working with us. So we all have this different way of like, maybe simplifying it, or maybe our way of explaining it to each other. And then we've just stuck to it and like sort of taken forward.
I have just two questions for the end of it.
Yeah.
First being like, what are the challenges that you are currently facing to like scale in terms of like from a business perspective, and what message do you want to pass to our audience in general sense?
Sorry, can you just repeat the first part of the
Yeah.
question?
What are the challenges that you face as a business to scale and to move in the direction where you want to take it?
The biggest challenge is to make sure we have the inner patience to be calm and to be able to accept the slow growth. Because we live in a very fast moving world where we are expected to give results in 6 months, 1 year, and 2 years, and everyone just asks ROI and turnover. So, to have that inner peace and the inner calmness to be like, it's a slow growth company, we want to do things right. It's okay if it takes us 2 years, 3 years, but we want to be a stable company. So, we don't see growth like this, but we see growth like, can we stay same stage, but can we be stable at it, being where everyone does their own part, and crisis is not managed in a way how it would just be like covered as a surface layer sort of a thing. So that is our biggest challenge, because every day we get tempted to be like, no, we want to be like a few other companies that can just shoot up, but then we're like, no, this will be the right way of doing it with the right checks and everything. um, Other issue, of course, since we are disrupting the packaging industry, it's not an easy industry to work in, especially women aren't used to working in this industry. There are not a lot of women in this industry when it comes to the manufacturing side of things or when it comes to the packaging side of things. So the gender being one thing, but just the scale at what people work at in this industry and what scale we are working at is very different. So to be able to disrupt this, industry in whatever small scale we're doing, to be able to hold the ground over there and then to grow from there is something where we are learning as and when we grow. And to make people more open to collaborate and partner. Like packaging is it's a close-knit industry, but at the same time, everyone works individually. Nobody works with each other. So, for people to make them open to collaborate. Kacha, if you manufacture cups and if I have, like, for example, a better solution, is there a way where we can work together so we can excel the impact sort of a thing? So that those kind of collaborations and making people, because it's most of these big industries are led by 2 generation, 3 generation old families. So like that whole thought process is a very different way of putting things out there. So to be able to make those connects and make your space is one of the most challenging things. Thankfully for us, the client side is the most supportive side. So like our customers, our clients have actually been the most like our biggest support system to make sure that we exist and we can do what we want to do. So it's within the industry that we need to make sure that we have that same good energy. And yeah, in terms of an overall message, I think there is this simple method. Two things that we've always sort of like I've applied it in my personal life and at work. Like let 20% of your work make 80% of impact. Like it's almost like a paradigm in some way, or like a paradox in a way, where like if you make smart steps, you'll always have like a larger impact. So like even in work, we get overwhelmed very easily, especially, and you guys will also relate to it because the sustainability space, especially in India, is still new. So, and we get overwhelmed because like, oh, there's so many issues and there's so much we want to solve. Where do we start from? So that time, this kind of a rule is something that has always been very handy for us. Like, we want to change the cello tape also. We want to change, the ink also, the box also, the bag that goes, everything. But I was like, it's not possible to do everything in one go. So I was like, can we change one thing to make the most amount of impact? Can we start from there and, then move to the other things? So that is one thing that we believe has always worked for us in some way or the other at a personal and professional level. So I think that is something that I would expect, or, sort of would want people to sort of look at this sort of a thinking. And the second being, again, that's something that comes from my personal life more, that there's a theory or philosophy of looking at the back of pack. Like, if you pick up anything, just questioning as to what goes into it or what goes into the making of it, that philosophy, if it's embedded, especially at like a child level or like, in your school or education level, it allows one to have maximum, like it allows you to take better decisions. So like suppose if I have two pens in my hand, and if I know like what goes into making of each of them, just out of curiosity, I'll know I'll pick the one which is better for me and like for the other stakeholders, environment being one of them. So, just sort of drilling this kind of a thought process, be it the chips you buy, the medicine you have, the cosmetics you put, the clothes you buy, everything. But the back of pack theory is what we call it as, then I feel you automatically start making better decisions. And this whole, issue of like whether to buy sustainable or no is out, because it's more about what is good for me and what is healthier for me as an individual, sort of a thing. So those are the only two things that I would leave, I would like to share. And of course, other than this, do look at the work we do, the products we make, and if there's anyone that you guys also know who will want to probably be, interested in moving to sustainable packaging, then we're happy to help them out.
There are tons of possibilities in terms of how like traditional companies are coming into sustainable transformation itself, right? Like they have been doing business for a long time, but I think the overall aura in the industry is currently changing, and people wants to collaborate in this industry, right? Compared to other industries where there is a cutthroat competition to
Correct.
market share. I think this industry, the founders are more happy to collaborate because it's more purpose driven. Of course, they want to make profits, but I think the purpose driven makes the collaboration more easy and fluid. So
Correct.
yeah,
Completely agree with that.
this was a wonderful, I think, conversation, and gonna keep us, recharged for probably a month or so, because we wanted to go into like understand sustainable packaging as an industry and talk to someone who has been into this for a long time. So thank you for getting us that insights and helping us, get actually a sneak peek into what this industry is currently going on and how you are trying to solve a problem. So thank you for sharing that with us.
Thank you so much for having like me over here, because I think it's not easy to do what you guys are doing, like to sort of get people from different sectors together at the same place and to understand the pain points, or like to understand what the actual inside of the industry are. So like I hope I've been able to share most of it and like sort of give like a better case study out there.